When you talk about technological innovations, we begin with artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, robotics, automation, virtual reality, augmented reality. All these initiatives are well received by the industrial sector. Therefore, we could see the fourth industrial revolution, and the skill sets which were in the previous century are no more existing in the 21st century because of the automation, because of the artificial intelligence. The human potentials are replaced with the technological potentials. And we are extremely happy because we could see a degree of perfection. But friends, let me share with you that the kind of revolution that took place in education system across the globe is not at par with the transformation that took place in industrial sector. So what needs to be done? We need to reconceptualize learning and develop a new landscape for learning in higher education by aligning technological resources, by aligning the advancements in digital technology with human potential. So friends, today I would like to talk something about a very fundamental aspect of creating learning spaces in digital era. You know, most of the time we neglect the spaces that we use in the learning process without understanding its importance and how these learning spaces really make an impact on students' learning is something that I am interested to share with you today. Bringing a computer, bringing a laptop, holding a mobile, connecting the classrooms through internet. Does it really make an impact on students' learning? Or we need to think about redesigning the learning spaces in our institutions. Friends, let me share with you, very few initiatives have been made in terms of redesigning learning spaces in our institutions of learning. In most of the countries, we still continue to have the traditional learning environments, classroom environments, but by using technological devices. Therefore, let us understand first what actually we mean by learning. Whether learning with technology has a different meaning or the principles of learning remain the same and the technology make the process much easier when we reposition the spaces of learning in a more conducive way. Friends, when I talk about learning, we must understand the three important aspects, whether it is teaching in the digital generation or dealing with the learner in a very traditional classroom practices. we have a lot of research conducted in the area of learning. I'm talking about the human learning. The three important ingredients which are essential for human learning, I coined it as engagement, enjoyment, and empowerment. Friends, the engagement is a very, very important aspect in the learning process. To what extent the teacher, the learner, is engaged into the process of learning, acquisition of knowledge, skills, attitudes, fine-tuning what he knows. And this engagement is not necessarily the cognitive engagement, where your thinking, your reasoning, your critical understanding are basically used. But the research says the learning becomes more strong and meaningful when the students are socially engaged and emotionally engaged in the process. Somehow, the educational institutions today, those who are using technology into the teaching learning process, the concern more or less is on cognitive engagement, your critical thinking, your creativity. But to what extent the social engagement and the emotional engagement are important and how they are bringing into the classroom practices. Friends, we need to ask this question today in terms of how these technological driven classrooms can really invigorate the social engagement of the learners and the emotional engagement of the learners. You know, the social engagement is the networks creating a community of learners. And the emotional engagement is the internalizing the process of learning, the knowledge, the skills. And that becomes a holistic way, an inclusive way of looking into the learning. So the first point that we need to discuss is about how this technology, the learning spaces that we have, are helping the learner to engage into the process, not only the cognitive engagement, but the social engagement and the emotional engagement. And the second important aspect is the enjoyment. My friend Dhaval Shah talked about the dopamine feel-good factor. When the learner is engaging in the learning process, what are his feelings? Is he really having the feel-good factor? Or is in a very confusing, frightening, with a lot of fear in mind, uncomfortable situations? Friends, we need to check this. To what extent the technology, digital learning, and the learning spaces that we are promoting today are really making learners joyful. And the joy and the elimination of fear can create a creative environment. Therefore, the question remains, to what extent our learners are really enjoying? And that enjoyment leads to certain innovations and creative processes. And the third important aspect for learning is, you talk about the empowerment. You know, the empowerment actually talks about to what extent the learner is transforming himself into a lifelong learner. It talks about the individual growth in terms of his cognition, his perception, meaning making. And finally, he would say that, yes, I did it. I could understand it. I could create it. And that's kind of an empowerment which the learning process has to create. Why I'm talking about these three important ingredients now is to check to what extent the component of engagement, the component of enjoyment, and the component of empowerment are understood by educators and bring these elements into a classroom practice. Therefore, the first question here is whether the existing classrooms, existing learning spaces are able to promote or nurture these three important E's: the engagement, the enjoyment, and the empowerment. You know, somebody rightly said, classrooms are out. No more classrooms. Don't build them. We don't need classrooms of a traditional models that we usually experience in the last century and even the beginning of this century. We need to think about alternative learning designs, learning spaces in the era of digital classrooms. Friends, the concept of future classrooms, innovative multimedia, active learning spaces, next generation schools, these are certain terminologies that we could say. And several authors have identified their impact on multiple human functions, including cognitive processes. As a pedagogue, we only talk about the content, content to design, content to organization, content to delivery. But friends, the human well-being into the entire process of learning is very, very important. And the learning spaces have made a significant role in learning. You know, some researchers even highlighted very interesting thing. It talks about the significant impact of elements such as temperature, luminosity, and acoustics have on the learning environment. Friends, are we taking care of this when we try to use the digital learning resources? We need to bring a kind of change into our thinking and understanding when we want to implement these into educational ecosystems. The research also says that students and teachers' performance is influenced by the internal environments of buildings, specifically by factors such as noise level, indoor temperature, air quality, lighting. And these factors are positively correlated with students' learning and behavior, as well as their satisfaction and academic performance. So why I bring these ideas today to this platform? When we are using technology, most of the times we talk only in terms of the content, reorganization of content, using the multimedia techniques into but without giving proper attention to the environmental factors, the noise, temperature, the quality, lighting, color. And these things have make an impact in students' learning. Through the literature, it's clearly evident that overall design of the physical environment of learning spaces has on its users. So what kind of learning environment that we need to keep? We need to understand what is that learning space is all about. The notion of space remains fresh momentum every time and new we interact with the world around us. As mobile devices weave into fabric of everyday life, one is no longer confined to a specific location, time, place in accessing and interacting with communication technologies. Therefore, interfaces become more adaptable and fluid according to the user's needs for switching seamlessly between augmented, real, virtual, by understanding the reality that the learners of 21st century are exposing to the real world, the virtual world, the augmented world. When we need to bring these experiences into the classroom, we need to think about the alternative models of redesigning learning spaces. Friends, the educational research has explored how physical arrangements are designed meaningfully to foster students' trajectories from vernacular discourses and peripheral participation to authentic discourse and practices. And such kind of ideas increase the focus on the social materiality has come as a part of growing recognition that space is only one among the ubiquitous meditating structures that support the development and distribution of cognition in complex relationships. So the question remains, in the era of digital learning, instead of treating learners and their context separately, research on learning spaces emphasizes space within the other situationally related tools, activity, social, epistemic norms, assessment, and the learning trajectories. If these activities are an integral part of learning, how the institutional learning spaces can be designed? An additional factor is the concept of learning space itself. When you talk about the meaning of space, it can be seen as not just a material object in a learning environment, but as an imagined geography. The idea behind fun space or even future learning space are examples of the type of ongoing negotiations around this idea. Several attempts have been made to understand this very important concept of learning space, to redesign the learning in the era of digital devices, in the era of digital learning. Therefore, friends, the OECD defined learning space as a physical space that supports multiple and diverse teaching learning programs and pedagogies,
Professor
including
Push,
current technologies.
Professor Push, my apology to interrupt. We have about 3 minutes left, and there are many good questions waiting for you, sir.
Yes.
For your
Thank you.
information. Thank you. Thank you.
I'll follow the time.
Thank you.
So, what needs to be done? We need to understand within the institutions, we need to create an open experimental space. The institutional space, it talks about the administrative blocks. We talk about the social learning spaces, where the networking, collaboration, creation of learning communities, and a network space, both physical and virtual. And therefore, we need to break the traditions of creating a normal learning space into a vibrant, dynamic, interconnected learning spaces in our institutions. And the moment we change the institutional spaces into these important activities, we also need to redesign the thinking of teaching learning. We also need to think about the professional development of teachers. We also need to think about the future of learning. Friends, we must make a beginning from today to understand that bringing technology into a traditional classroom may not be successful in giving the optimum results. We also need to change the structure, the form, the size, and recreate the learning environments to fit into the technologically oriented teaching learning process. With this, I stop my presentation, and I would love to address your questions. Thank you so much. Over to organizers.
Wow, thank you so much, Professor Push. Okay, there are so many interesting questions waiting for you, sir. So while we're waiting for the screen, okay, now let me give you information. Your question will be in yellow color. Okay, co-host, could you refresh the screen, please? There are more questions coming up right now. Okay, Professor Push, many people ask you these simple things. Technologies are fantastic, but can we really integrate new technology into our teaching and learning to engage students? What is the best practice for doing that? So any insight on that, please?
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much for observations that you presented on the screen. You know, most of the questions are talking about what kind of technology that we need to use it. Friends, disruptive technologies have a very less life. Extinction is something which is reality in the technological world. What you see today may not be visible tomorrow. That's the kind of speed in which it's happening. Therefore, what is important for us is to develop a sound pedagogical model, focusing about the principles of learning, especially the principles of human learning, and try to align with the possible technologies that come up. And that is the kind of a skill that educators need to have in the 21st century, the skill of techno-pedagogic. How to align the techno-pedagogic into classroom practice. Therefore, I once again stress the three important is the engagement of the learner, the enjoyment of the learner, and the empowerment of the learner is something which we are concerned about as educators. Therefore, how to use technology, how to tame technology into our educational objectives is the concern, not to dilute the educational process for adopting the technological developments. I think this should be a very important aspect for every educator. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So the 3E model from you, engagement, enjoyment, and empowerment of the learners are the key, and never put technology before pedagogy. Pedagogy should be the first. So thank you so much, Professor Push. We wish we have more time for you, really. So fingers crossed, COVID is gone very fast, and we would love to have you here with us in person again, so you can have longer session with us. So for today, thank you, sir, and please take care. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sawadee-krap.
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 Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for sharing such a fruitful thought and challenging us to think about the learning space for the digital era by, like synergizing that 3 E's, right? Engagement, empowerment, and enjoyment. That's very nice thought, and I mean, very, very fruitful thought for us. Thank you very much. And what time is it over there, Professor? So we can say, good night or good evening.
It is 10:35 a.m. here in India.
Okay, so about the same. Yeah, 2 hours earlier.
Thank you so much, and wish you all the best for other sessions as well. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much. Hope to see you in person next year. Thank
Sure.
you. You have a great day, Professor.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Kapun-krap.
สวัส
Kapun-krap.
ดีค่ะสวัสดีค่ะ Well,